Oh, you hanging out right. Hanging out right. Oh, you hanging out right. I know hanging out right. Oh, you hanging out right.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Hanging Out Right with Chuck Rainey, and I'm John Martinez. And Chuck,
Yo,
today we're going to talk about leadership.
Doing, brother?
I'm doing good. We're going to talk about leadership today. Who introduce our guest, man?
Oh yeah. Well, we got Rod Taylor, Dr. Rod Taylor, Professor Rod Taylor. Rod has been around a long, long time. He's been my friend for a good long time. I've witnessed Rod when he was a professor at Stanford, and also too at Tennessee State University. And Rod is now at Belmont University, and he also does leadership skills and conferences. And Rod, you can help me out right off the bat if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense.
Well, I'm not at Belmont.
Nashville.
Yeah, I'm not at Belmont. I've spent the last two years ago, and there are two schools in Nashville that get confused a lot: Lipscomb and Belmont. And I've been an artist in residence at Lipscomb for a couple of years in their commercial music program. But my main thing is I have my own company that does the things that you're talking about, leadership and training and all those kind of things. But I always have some relationship to a couple of universities that end up dragging you along with me to do some things. But Belmont's here in Nashville. I got a great friend who's heading up that program, Jeremy Lane. But I've been working with Lipscomb for the last couple of years to help them launch a new commercial music program. I got them kind of going.
Well, also too, I've known Rod for many, many years. Very, very good friend, and also too, I've learned a whole lot from Rod. For our listeners, a lot of people are successful, a lot of people are not successful, and some people are successful sometimes. You know, there's a whole space and time there where we go through different eras of being completely successful and not. Our second guest is Gary Katz, also to a very, very dear friend. Gary was the producer of Steely Dan on all the recordings that I know of. And so I know Gary very, very well from working years and years and years with Gary, and also listening to having private conversations about different things that go on in the studio. But I consider Gary, I consider you being one of the very, very successful producers. And I know that it ain't easy. It's not easy because you have to handle different groups of people. You have to stay in line with different people.
I always said my job wasn't making music, it was being a shrink.
Yeah, well,
I'm glad you laughed at that, John, but I'm as dead serious as I can be. It was more important to have guys I could be in a room with who were a variety of types and styles so that they could make music.
Mm.
I don't play, I don't read. I
Can you dance?
together, I listen, but if I couldn't deal with the guys, music would never have happened.
I know. I know. Well, Gary, I can say before we get through this whole interview or this whole thing, that it's a pleasure working with you and for you.
To say that you are one of my favorite people in life and musicians is an understatement. You've been a friend of mine for years, greasy popcorn and all, and I just am thrilled that you and I've worked all these years together. You're, one of my favorite people who I work with.
You're making me blush.
Well, it's true. I can't tell that you're blushing.
We're all glad you guys work together because, man, that I came up on that stuff, Steely Dan, and of course I was listening to Chuck Rainey when I was watching TV when I was a little boy.
I was listening to Chuck Rainey when I was a little boy.
Yeah. There you
go. How old are you guys making me? I know I'm the oldest. Gary said little boy. So John,
I'll let you have that title. I'm not sure that's true, but I'll let you have it.
Okay, I'll take it. I'm glad to take anything. I'm
But
glad
not that one.
to. I don't know. I'll take it all, Gary.
You got it, Chuck.
I'll take it all.
I'll always give it up. to
I've
you.
reached an age where I'm happy to wake up. I have to pee. I'm
You
hungry.
can.
I ain't mad at nobody.
I hear you.
So like waking up is a pleasure for me nowadays, you know.
I do understand.
So
And
We're
then,
redefining success here in very interesting
Yeah.
ways. You can wake up, take a piss. That's the first
it's
first
not
one.
having to take a piss, it's being able.
Ooh. Oh,
Oh,
so John, what you got up over there?
Oh man, I think we just found the title of our next book. But anyway, let's start with Mr. Katz. So
okay.
how did you get your start? That's the main question I have for you.
How did I get started?
Yeah. Since you
I
said
grew up, I grew up with a bunch of four guys who had hit after hit called Jay and the Americans. And although it wasn't my favorite music, they were my best buddies. And I followed when I listened to music all my life. And although my piano teacher threw me off the bench when I said, I don't want to play Malaguena. I want to play what Elvis Presley sings.
Mm.
And I just developed for myself, my own likes or dislikes. I felt like, I sort of knew what I liked and was clear
where did you grow up?
in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And I followed my buddies everywhere they went, and they were having hit after hit, and they went to places I couldn't go to without them. I met a guy named Artie Rip who owned a company called Kama Sutra that was, just incredibly successful at the time. And I got to spend time with them. And then, fortunately, just the way things worked out, Lieber and Stoller, who to this day are my favorite record music makers, they had written a song called Only in America. And they had the Drifters, my favorite group, sing it. And it was just as good as it could be.
Only in America.
And stations south of Jersey City wouldn't play it. So they loved the song. They didn't want to lose it. They unbelievably took Benny and those guys off the track, which is almost sacrilegious to think about. And they put my friends on.
Mm.
So when they did that, I got to go to the studio and meet Mike and Jerry. And they befriended me for whatever reason. And I was there one night when Chuck might have been playing the song called Cool Cool Kitty from New York City. And while they were making the record, Jerry would say to Mike, I don't really like. The funny thing is, my high school buddy, who was about 5'1" and 19 years old, named Artie Butler, was conducting these guys playing. It was like a dream thing, like watching Artie, who we just graduated high school with the year before, conducting Mike and Jerry's band. And Jerry'd say to Mike, I don't like that thing they do. Ask them to do, just make it more something I'm going to like. And I remember leaving the studio that night, Hotel America. What was it called? I'll think of it. Anyhow, leaving the studio saying, I can do that. Because I always felt I wouldn't be able to get much further because, like I said, I didn't play, I didn't write. But when I saw Jerry do that to Mike, and then again and again, I said, I felt I could do that. I knew what I liked. If my taste was good, it would be okay. If my taste wasn't good, it wouldn't be. And then I worked for Bobby Darin, and then he sold the company, and I lost my job, and I couldn't get a job. And I had a really good friend from high school who was running Dunhill Publishing. And he called me one night and said, "Hey, listen, there's an A&R guy here at Dunhill, ABC Dunhill, who got fired. Write the guy president a letter. I'll go talk to him." I said, "Eddie, you want me to write a guy a cold letter asking for a job?" He said, "Yeah." I didn't want to do it. I was in Brooklyn. There was a couple of years no work. I was kind of depressed, and my wife at the time bugged me all night. I was watching Monday Night Football. She bugged me all night. "Write the guy a letter. Write the guy a letter." So, to be honest, rather than have to listen more to her say that, I took a yellow pad and a pen and I said, "Dear Jay, writing this letter to you right now is a much bigger pain in the ass for me than it is for you sitting in your chair reading it. This is my name. This is what I've done briefly. I work with two guys who I think are it. If you have any interest, here's my number. Thanks a lot." 2 days later, my phone rings and it's Jay Lasker saying, "I'm still laughing at your letter. There's a ticket downstairs. Be here tomorrow morning at 11 a.m." I did. He was from Brooklyn. He was a Brooklyn cab driving, long cigar smoking kind of guy. We hit it off. He said, "Go downstairs to," guy's name was Steve Barry, who was a very famous producer at the time. He produced number one record after number one record. They were all very pop records. It was Grassroots, Hamilton Joe Frank, Tommy Rowe, very pop oriented records. I knew who he was. And I had a demo of what Donald and Walters, not Steely Dan, just Donald and Walters, and it was out. It was out, really out. Made the music we made, seem like Billy Don't Be a Hero. So we walk in. We're both from Brooklyn. Steve's from Brooklyn. We talk sports. Eventually, he said, "So I hear you have something for me to hear."
Hmm.
Really didn't want to give up this tape. I said, "Here it is. It's a demo. There's much more to them." And I was dancing. He put it on. It was a very bizarre song called Brain Tap Shuffle. When it was over, he said, "These guys are the Beatles."
Wow.
And 1 minute later, I had a career.
Wow.
So whenever I talk at colleges or wherever, I always tell them that story. Because when you think that it can't possibly happen, it can.
You
That's
never
amazing.
know.
You never know. I
You
mean,
never
who would know I'm going to walk in a room with Lieber and Stoller with my friends and hang out, or be able to call? When I met Donald Walter, I took him up to Mike's place on Central Park West. Where was I ever going to be able to do that? They even wrote in their book, Hound Dog, uh, um, that was the biggest mistake they made. Donald sat at the piano and sang. They said it's really great. It wasn't commercial. It was so less commercial than what it wound up being. It was just too out. They just appreciated it. But that's how I got started.
That's
That's
amazing.
very interesting. Gary, let me ask you one quick question. Um, when you got started, I'm pretty sure that you went through a lot of trials and tribulations in putting people together. And then
Well,
once you put them together, you make a decision on who to keep together and who to send away. I know that that's a lot of wear and tear on the
but
mind.
you know me well enough and have seen me work enough to know all of us have different styles.
Mhm.
And my style was always to be um, overseeing to make sure things went right. But I always said to the artist, your name's in big letters on the front of this record, and my name's in really little letters on the back of it. What do you want to do?
Mhm.
So it wasn't a matter of, if Donald and Walter said X and Y and I disagreed, we'd talk and whatever. At the end of the day, it was always going to be their record and what they wanted. And
Mhm.
that's sort of how I worked with everyone. I never felt the need to be in charge.
Well, I know one thing for sure. Every time the answer service called me for at that particular time, I think I had other clients at Warner Brothers, but every time your name was mentioned, I knew that it was going to be good music,
We
but you don't
tried.
always get
I hear you.
good music.
I was what an elitist. I wanted to make music I liked and hopefully find people that would want to work with me and whose music I liked. Then I could help. If I was just, sitting in a room and rudimentary going through putting this part here and that part there, I think there are guys who are better than I am at that.
Mm. Well, you were very, very good. John, you got anything you want to aim at Gary before I go to my man, Rod Taylor?
Now I got plenty of questions, but I do want to hear from Rod real quick because now I'm interested in how Rod went from, well, how do you go from academia and music to then doing like corporate training and leadership seminars? How did that all happen? So give us your backstory.
And also, too, how you got into that, Rod.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm just want to say, Gary, I'm glad to finally know what was in that letter. I've wondered because all I ever heard was that you wrote a really funky letter to that guy,
I
and
did.
somehow it got you the job. I had no idea what you said in it, and I should have asked you years ago. And thanks for sharing that. That's
I
awesome.
don't recommend it to everybody. It just happened to
I'm
be
gonna
right.
try it this week.
It just at that moment worked. I wouldn't recommend it.
Well,
Well,
for me,
nobody has a sense of humor anymore.
yeah. My first instrument was bass, and that has a lot to do with Chuck Rainey. Because before I even knew what was happening in music on that low end, I just knew I liked that frequency. And a lot of it was because the TV shows in the 70s I was watching, and I wouldn't know till later. Chuck was playing on those Hawaii 5-0, Sanford Sun and MASH, just all these shows had that stuff going on there. But when I was in college, I was first generation college student, so no one in my family did that. And I just decided my senior year that I wanted to be successful on a grand level. I was motivated by teaching, not by good teachers, by the way, by bad teachers. Interesting enough, I had so many bad teachers in school. I had a few good ones, but the bad ones motivated me because I thought, well, someone could do this better. So I should give it a shot. But along the way, I kept playing bass. And unlike high school, where I wasn't very studious or paid attention, in college, I did. I was paying for it myself, put myself through school, worked 2 or 3 jobs the whole time. And I just remember, and this connects to our topic, but I remember when I left home in my car, and on the way to college, the muffler for that car would fall off, and I'd have to start at Ace Hardware and get a hacksaw to cut it off completely because it was just dragging while I was driving down the interstate. I remember thinking, succeed or fail, it's now all on me, and just reveling in that. Just kind of embracing that moment. Like if I'm successful, it'll be because I did something right. If I'm not, it'll be because I did something wrong. But I'm the one that controls it from here on out. And I just remember loving that feeling and being scared a little bit too. But along the way, I kept going to school, as you know, and figured out by my senior year that I was doing really well in school and had the opportunity at that point to move to Nashville with a band. I played with them for a couple months. It was during the grunge era, and it just wasn't a good fit. It wasn't a good team. I fit musically. I loved it. But just imagining, I remember sitting down and thinking, what's a bus ride going to be like every day with these guys? And just not feeling like I was part of the team. I didn't fit within them in certain ways. I felt like they were going to blow up at any minute, and they did after a while. but just passed up and went on to grad school. And there I studied art, continued on the humanities, but now about how art affects knowledge. And I was very influenced by lyrics when I was a kid. You know, growing up in East Texas, I didn't have access to a lot of the world, but I did through the library and I did through music. I mean, the first time I ever heard about the apartheid was through music. And then I took the lyrics in to the librarian and gave them to her. And I said, "What's the apartheid? And can you help me figure out what it is?" And of course, she was like, "That's apartheid, young man." And then took me to the New York Times and let me read about it. So music was very influential. So when I went to grad school, um, I just committed to keeping music a big part of my life, even though I was focusing in literature and philosophy, and just kept doing that along the way. And long story short, you know, I ended up my first job at Stanford and kept music alive there and became a resident fellow there, which was a special post that allowed me to bring a passion of mine to the campus. And of course, I chose music. And I brought Chuck there, and I brought Victor there, and I brought Lawrence Juber uh, came there, and Michael Manring. Of course, I brought a lot of bass players because I love bass players. But
You know, but Steve was there
Steve
also.
Bailey, you know, who's now the chair at Berkeley, brought a lot of friends from Nashville out there, but just saw the connection between learning and music. And um, along the way, got involved with the design thinking that was part of Stanford's culture. And by the time we moved to Nashville, I was getting a little bit worn out at just the limitations of academia. I love the heady part of it. I love the writing part of it, the philosophizing, but it's an institution and it has pretty strict parameters. And Dave Kelly, who was the founder of the D School at Stanford, told me one time, he said, "If you're going to wait for the university to catch up with your ideas, you're going to be dead." He said, "Try them out. If they're good ideas, they'll take. If they're not good, they won't." And I got into that mindset again of, well, if I succeed at this next endeavor, it'll be because I did something right. And if I do something wrong, then I'll learn from it. And so that's when I launched my company. And it worked out well. I'd been doing a little bit on the side, but worked out so that I ended up with some of my first clients being just top Fortune 500 companies. And I was using art and music and literature and philosophy to teach them about leadership. And that was unusual to them, but I loved it. And using music, you know, someone would ask me to give a keynote and I would say, well, I could come speak and bore you like everyone else, or I could bring a band and we'll teach you through music. And so I would bring Matt Billingsley, who's Taylor Swift's drummer, Bo Tackett, guitar player for Blake Shelton. And we would go out and I'd write these keynotes using music, you know, laws of leadership. And we would use the history of the bass from 1951 to present. And we'd look at 7 things that happened with the bass since then that are connected to leadership. And so I would just kind of get creative and invent those kind of things. Sometimes Victor, J.D. Blair, Bob Heminger, and I would do the same thing. And so it's just kind of worked out. By 2014 or 15, I just left academics altogether and did the company full time. And since then, I got pulled back in a couple different ways because of friends at Lipscomb. You know, a friend started the program there, Brown Bannister, who's a producer. He produced Amy Grant, among others. And he asked me to help out for a couple of years, so I did that. And then D School in Paris, I helped out for about 3 years there. And the University of Arkansas, where Chuck went with me to that too, to help with Jeremy Lane, who's now at Belmont. So I just saw them as, to me, music is connected to everything. And I didn't see any reason why I couldn't combine the two. I wrote a textbook called E-Tunes, which is about the effect of digital technology on music. And so I just kind of, I never saw them as having to be separate. But as you know, John, academics is usually focus on one thing. And I'm out, and I'm out here like I'm writing for Bass Player Magazine, and I'm doing this, and I'm writing for Oxford University Press, but also for No Treble, you know. And that was all hard for them to get their head around. But I wouldn't have.
Here's a quick question. How do you define leadership?
It has so much to do with people. Last week I led a training downtown in Nashville on the difference between managing and leading for people who are moving from managing to leading. And we defined it as managing is so much about the task. It's fulfilling the task, it's getting the thing done. But leading is about inspiring people to do it. And when I think of like Gary, you know, it's like the best producers to me from that era were the ones who inspired amazing people to do their thing. They didn't boss them around. You know, Donny Hathaway, you know, just these are people who inspired you to become the best person. So you're influencing as a leader, whereas a manager, you're usually just telling people what's up. You know, here's what you do. But a leader inspires, a leader influences. And like Gary mentioned, sometimes it's from the back. And it's just watching, and it's working with people's psychology. And so we spend a lot of time on empathy because I think the best leaders are empathetic.
Yeah.
I
Very
think
good.
a lot of it has to do with allowing people, giving people, if you can control it, the space and room they need to do what they want to do. If you trust them, like I trusted Donald and Walter music implicitly. It doesn't mean I didn't disagree once in a while. I'd say, why are we doing that and not this? But those, Walter, one day, Rainey, I don't think I ever told you this, but Donald and I were very close, and Walter and I were not enemies, but we weren't as close. And I checked into a hotel in LA, Le Rev. I was doing something, and someone said to me, "You know, Walter's upstairs in the hotel too." I said, "Oh, cool." So I got upstairs and I called him, and I was in 219, he was in 217. I never saw him that entire trip. We spoke for a few hours, longer than we probably ever had. But he said something that I always felt and sort of helped dictate how I go about my interactions in the studio. And it was, you and I will never work with anyone as talented as him again. And there was no doubt about that. I was glad to hear a reaffirmation from him to me, but it dictated how I worked.
Who were
It
you
was
talking
like
about?
don't Walter said to me about Donald
I see.
that we would never work with anyone as talented as him again. And as it turned out, he was absolutely right. I never did. The closest was Laura, and that was just a different kind of talent. But and it helped me that when he said that, realize from someone who's was extraordinarily talented in his own right, which Chuck can talk to better than I, meaning Walter, that it's not my job to get in the way. It's my job to get out of the way and to let them do what they can do. And I always tried to work with really talented people. I had a partner, Richard Perry, and I went into business together when we got out of college. We had a mutual friend, one of the guys in Jane the Americans, was friendly with Kenny, and he was with Richard, and Kenny was one of my closest friends, Kenny Vance. And when Richard and I got into business and we'd go in the studio and made it, learning how to make records, we had just such a different style. I mean, we got along and all, but Richard had to be influential in how the music was created. And that was the last thing I wanted to do. One, I wasn't capable. And two, I worked with people who were much better than I was at that. So it helped teach me a style of working to appreciate that it's not the same in every room, but to learn my place in every room.
Well, that was very well put. I've always been very interested in how things rhetorically are passed down to different people. Five people can hear one person say one thing, and you have a general idea of what was said, but we receive it differently. Another person comes along and says the same thing, but he says it altogether differently. So for the musicians, uh, you sort of have to have experience on knowing who means what when they say what. Walter and Donald, to me, Walter was very clear to me, and very clear on the things he would ask me to do. Whereas Donald was never clear.
He was to Griff.
Uh,
Because that was his entry, because he could be. He couldn't be clear to you. He would say something to Walter, although to tell you the truth, he rarely said anything to him, because much as the way I felt about the two of them, that's how Donald felt about Walter. So he knew he didn't have to deal with it. Walter would do it and it would be good. And he did. I can see it in front of me of Walter sitting next to you, and you'd be asking him this or that, and he would talk to you. Donald and I never once ever even asked, so what are you guys talking about? There was nothing to ask. That's the truth.
you got to have experience because to me, when you say leadership and management, when I look at a producer, and I've worked with a lot of producers, as you can imagine, and a lot of them are very successful, but the producer to me is the leader. And that even if they're not saying anything, I can read silence or I can read emotions. I can read it without some person saying anything. And most studio players can do the same thing. And then there's some that can't, or they can, but they refuse to. You know, so the rhetorical, I've watched Rod teach and say certain things, and he does, which I really also enjoyed about Rod, is that he teaches, he uses something other than the subject matter to talk about what he wants to talk about. Also, too, what I like about you and Rod both is you don't fool around. If somebody's got to go, they're gone. And
We were lucky. Rod may run into more people he doesn't know occasionally than I did. But after a short period of time, I picked up the phone. I called Chuck Rainey. There was nothing, or Bernard Purdy or Paul Griffin or Steve Gadd. There was not a lot of concern.
mm,
So, we came to the studio knowing this is going to be good. I never came to the studio very nervous.
oh, me neither. Me neither.
Well, you shouldn't.
Well,
That's
on
great.
these sessions with you, Gary, I was never nervous because I always knew who the musicians were.
Exactly.
And the musicians were people that I had worked with over and over and over again. You had a very powerful statement when you came to Dallas to do a program with John and I, when you said, "I use my guys," and I have learned. I have
You said that a
But
million
wait a
times.
minute, but I didn't invent that. Jerry Wexler could say the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't invent I use my guys. I use my guys because I couldn't get in trouble. No, I'm being honest with you.
Yeah.
If I was someone else and there was a guy in the room I couldn't go to him and say, you know what, instead of that G flat, I couldn't do that. So I had to have my guys in the room so that I knew I wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, well, you certainly didn't have to. And
No,
G flat very rarely came up.
and that's why I did what I did.
It makes me think, Chuck, when you're putting a team together, it's a friend of mine named Jerry Padani owns a leadership company out of Colorado. We have this agreement with each other. We went to grad school together, both went to academics, both left academics. And we have the statement when we're putting a team together, if it's not hell yeah, it's hell no. And it's this notion that I don't want anyone on the team who I just am not like that's the right to, think of Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. That's the right person and that's the right seat for them. Because then as a leader, you don't have to micromanage. I imagine Gary feels the same way I do. I hate that. Like I just want to set it and let it. And and if you take someone, you say, like, Bo Tackett, if a Bo, here's the job, then I can never think about it again. Because
Exactly.
he's got it. And to me, good leaders, thinking of John's question, are people who recognize how people and how to get out of their way to let them do their job, but they recognize the right person, because there are people you couldn't do that with. if you put them in the studio and you put them in the band and you turned your back, it was something would blow up. But there, knowing the right person to put in there so that you don't have to so that you can do your thing and let them do their thing, is, to me, is just a skill set of recognizing that talent. And if you got if you got no budget, that's even better. Right, Gary?
Yeah. Well, it was our money.
Yeah.
As it turned out, and besides which, I produced as a fan. Like when I made records, particularly with Donald and Walter, I would always say, I got to hear it first.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked as a fan, and I would get to hear it first. And I didn't want them to do anything much different than what they wanted to do, other than, there would always be things that would come up, but not often. Honestly, not often. The biggest things would be to tell Fagan, "Oh, I like that vocal," and he'd say, "No, I don't like it." And I say, "Fagan, I like it." One particularly, he didn't like something in Kid Charlemagne that he thought was embarrassing when he said, "Is there gas in the car?" And it was the biggest fight he and I had. I said, "You can stand here all day. The record's going to go out. Is there gas in the car?" And he eventually, yeah.
That's
He
the
was
best
just
line, that song.
no kid. He was just warming up in between lines. He was just warming up.
Wow.
Wow.
So every once in a while, not often, I'd say no, and he knew if I said no and fought him hard enough, he would usually give in.
Mm.
It wasn't often.
Let's talk about leaders. Let's talk
So
about leaders.
what role? I mean, Gary, you jokingly said, but I know you were being serious, that a lot of your job was kind of playing shrink to the musicians. How much of a
Let me
role?
give you a great, for instance, that Chuck was a witness to. We recorded a song called "Sign In Stranger." We wound up doing it really late at night in A1 at A&R in the big room. And Chuck, unfortunately for him, sat right in between Griffin over here and Purdy over here. And neither one of them was as meek, a mild as personality as Chuck is. And they didn't get along all that well sometimes. So,
Who never got along.
okay, they never got along. Except when they were in the room playing and they got along really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as
So,
friends, it's always a problem.
you know, my shrink thing probably was heightened. My most shrinkish thing was always getting Purdy, not to play good, but when to tell him to play and not jerk around. Because he would sit and play like Babylon Sisters, where Chuck was also in the room. Bernard played it right the first time. And that is absolutely the truth. Played it down. It was perfect. There was nothing to say. Chuck didn't know if the song was in the key of L or B, nor did Griffin. But Bernard, he burned it, sitting on a riser. And he, as he would do, he would take his phones and put them down because, as far as he was concerned, he was done. And I literally didn't know what to do. Bernard is a bigger than life, whatever. And he walked in the room, and I took him aside. I said, "Bernard, don't do that again. You don't have to play. You don't have to burn yourself out. You can tap your foot on the hi-hat. When I tell you the guys are ready, play good." And I never had a problem with Bernard after that.